Greetings, Nephilim. I'm Craddock, and today we're going to be discussing a Tal Electrocute Monolteal based build. This build in particular was a lot of fun to test. It's a very fun to play, a lot of striking visuals, different mechanics that you can play around with. Now this build is not going to be clearing as fast as, say, Demon Hunter or even Monk, or even Tal Rasha Frozen Orb Wizard, but it has some very respectable clear times, somewhere in the range of 3 to 4.5 minutes for T13, and it's a ton of fun to play. It's a lot of fun. It's more of a laid-back playstyle. It's an acquired taste, but it's definitely one of the cooler builds in the Wizard's arsenal. The reason for coming back to this build is I had put together variations for Tal Electrocute Monolteal back a couple of patches ago, but for the current patch, 2.6.1, I had never revisited, and there were two items in particular that had been updated or had gotten buffed. In particular, the Halo of Carini, which now gives a huge damage reduction, and then Orb of Infinite Depth, which gives up to 40% multiplier, and even more damage reduction than it did in the past. So, wanted to rediscover this build, see what I could put together, and after a lot of testing, I think I've landed on something that is really juicy, or at least for, in terms of running a Tal Electrocute build. This is probably one of the strongest setups you're going to see. So I did a lot of testing, tested with Pain Enhancer, tested with Endless Walk, we tested Spell Steal, we tested a lot of different skills and abilities, deflection, anything and everything you can think of. I probably tested it trying to get this build perfected, or as close to perfect as possible. And the closest configuration, I will say, was Endless Walk, just because of the sheer multiplier from that set. However, this variation excels even more than Endless Walk, in particular because we can include the multiplier from the Orb of Infinite Depth, and we 100% can keep the Bane of the Trapped while still hitting the breakpoints that we're going to want to meet. Attack speed is very important with this build, so hitting those Monolteal Electrocute, breakpoints, very important. We are using a couple of items, some of the more important items in the build that are kind of core to the build include Aetherwalker. We're going to be teleporting around. This is what's going to get us there. We don't really use a lot of resource in the build, and resource recovery is very high due to the Shaman Del Seer, so you don't have to worry about resource. One of the cool things also about the build. We're also using the Mycon's Ball of Hate. Electrocute chains to enemies that it's already hit. Very important for being able to deal more damage, especially to elite packs and sometimes the Rift Guardian, right? And we're also using the Shaman Del Seer, as I mentioned. The big thing with this item is that you're going to attack faster. Your signature spells will attack faster and can be used as an attack speed multiplier for meeting higher breakpoints in regards to proccing paralysis and Annulled Heal, right? So, very important. You also get the Arcane Power Recovery, and then we also have the Annulled Heal. Very big. This particular setup, I'm opting to run the Carini with the Ring of Royal Grandeur, and I'm wearing the Witching Hour. Witching Hour, of course, giving us an extra attack speed roll, in addition with extra crit hit damage, just seemed to be the best option overall this particular setup. Basically, since we have the Hail of Carini, both the Hail of Carini and the Orb of Infinite Depth, we really don't have any worry at this point when you're looking at the build as far as defense is concerned, which is great because you can still tank some Molten Explosions, Grotesque Explosions, you can take them on no problem, and you can get by just fine, which is great. It also means you can slot some optional, some more basically additive damage or debuff skill or passive choices. So here we've opted for Force Weapon instead of, for example, Spell Steal or perhaps even deflection. We've gone just Force Weapon, going for that brute additive damage. This build doesn't have a lot of additive damage, so having this amount is basically going to be similar to a multiplier. We're also running elemental exposure in this setup, giving us up to a 20% debuff. You're going to want to probably favor a cold damage weapon, because this will also apply cold when you hit enemies with your electrocute, and cold is on the black hole. It's the longest cooldown, so that's kind of what you're going to want to shoot for. Fire would be a close second in my opinion. If you couldn't get a cold weapon, go for a fire weapon, but you'll be stacking at least 15% and sometimes up to 20% with this build debuff, which is great. And then the other thing we're able to fit in here is a little bit of elite damage on this source, just giving us that little bump of extra elite damage, especially useful for the Rift Guardian, which is one of the hardest aspects to balance with this build, was being able to kill the Rift Guardian in a swift manner. Very difficult with Electrocute, right? Let's go over the attack speed, and I'll just briefly go over the attack speed breakpoint that you're going to want to shoot for. As far as gear is concerned, pretty much go for perfect attack speed on all of these pieces. So weapon, both rings, you're going to want attack speed. You're going to want attack speed on the gloves, chest piece, the witching hour, the belt, and on the amulet. So all of those need attack speed. And there's a little bit of leeway. This here will put you up to, including Gogok, like if you add Gogok in, 2.5 attacks per second. And that's basically the breakpoint you want to be hitting, at least 2.5. Perfect rolls on all of those pieces will get you up to 2.5, no problem. And you can opt for Templar if you want. For the extra healing, that would be a route you could go. But it would also be required if you're running in group. With this build, you would need perfect rolls, unfortunately. But if you're running solo, you have an option. You can run with the Enchantress instead. And Enchantress giving us that nice focused mind aura for the attack speed, the extra 3% attack speed. It's just a little bit extra to give you a little bit of buffer in case one of your items, such as the amulet, and say you get an attack speed crit amulet, but it only has 5% on it instead of 7%, you can just run with the Enchantress, cover that amount, and still hit the breakpoints that we want to hit. So a couple things with this build. My original intent was to make it feel less random, right? The build itself has some random element to it, you know, when you put in Manal Teal, but on top of that, if you say slot Goldwrap for the extra armor buff, it means you have to pick up gold, and your defense is tied to picking up gold. I kind of wanted to get away from that, so the Karini in combination with the Orb of Infinite Depth, even if OID happens to drop, the stacks drop, you should still be fine defensively until you can get them ramped up again, right? But that moves us away from Goldwrap. You're no longer relying on gold pickup, which is great. Also, a second thing was I used to run Pain Enhancer on this build, which is still a great third gem if for whatever reason you don't want to run a Boon of the Hoarder, or you want to go into like lower greater rifting, you know, maybe 60, a GR 60, 65, something like this, just to level up gems. You could definitely put in a Pain Enhancer in this slot, and it would work magnificently for getting you at those extra breakpoints, right? But in this case, I wanted to be more consistent with the level of attack speed in the build. That means like as soon as you jump on a pack, you're always going to have the same level of attack speed. You're not going to have to worry too much, and Gogok pretty much allows us to do this. It does take some time to ramp up in the beginning of the Rift, or when you're transitioning Rift levels, but overall I think it's the better option if this is the goal, right? And yeah, so it's a very smooth build. Some of the other bonuses, Audacity, we do have the Trap Gem as a multiplier, OID as a multiplier. We're running Unstable Anomaly for the second life. We have Calamity to help with CC, stuns, and proc Arcane, right? And we do have the Black Hole. Black Hole is very useful in this build to cast near elite packs because it will pull them together and allow the chains to hit the entire elite pack. So when you do proc paralysis and the Manal Teal damage on that pack, it would just decimate them. As opposed to, it's really helpful as well for pulling in some of the ranged elite packs. So use it when you can. It is on a high cooldown, so just keep that in mind. And then of course we're casting Explosive Blast on cooldown. I recommend Numlock or some sort of autocast script to perform that action. Another thing to note here with the rune on Storm Armor, since we don't really need the extra arcane power from Power of the Storm, we don't really need Thunderstorm. All we really need is to ensure Karini uptime, and the best rune for that, I feel, is Shocking Aspect. Shocking Aspect, sending out those extra bolts to when we crit enemies. This is subject to proc coefficients, and it is limited in range as compared to the base attack from Storm Armor, but it does tend to keep up Karini more often. Like, you'll see it proc more often than you would otherwise. Scramble does have some use here, so if you want to go Scramble, that is perfectly fine to give you possibly a little bit of extra movement speed when you have to pick up the Death's Breath, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I've been using the build. I hadn't been running around too much. I've just been using the Teleport in combination while channeling the Electrocute to help deal damage. So movement speed wasn't a top priority in my mind for this setup, but if you want to opt that way, you can definitely do that. What ring you should wear? I'm going to recommend wearing the Hail of Karini and the Ring of Royal Grandeur, because those will be easier to get in season. But if you happen to get a really good Manalt heal, even if it's non-ancient, as long as it rolls really high weapon damage on the range and really good affixes, you can equip it, right? But I think most of the time, Ring of Royal Grandeur will be the more powerful and easier to acquire item. This is a bounty item, by the way, Act 1 primarily. Other things that you could do, instead of the elite damage on the source, this is a very hard affix to roll on a source, so if you don't have the resources to get it yet, just roll life percent instead of elite damage, and that will just give you a little bit of boost to toughness, which will be nice to have on the source as well. And let's see, other areas, you want armor, want chest boots. Let's see, on the shoulder piece, I'm going to actually recommend all resistance here, because we're going to be wanting to slot a lot of specific secondaries in this build. So secondaries are going to be one of the more challenging things to gear out, but also one of the more effective things to use once you get it geared out, because pickup radius is going to be a huge deal with this build. You're going to want to get at least 10 bonus to globe radius. You can get up to 14. If you do roll the shoulders, you can get up to plus 16. So, but yeah, I'm going to recommend 14, but minimum you're going to want 10, which is kind of near what I think I had 9 in the video. But how you're going to fit this in is just on every armor piece basically that you can put it on, right? And even the bracer, right? The shoulder piece does roll with gold percent by default. That's why I've placed the gold percent here. Gold percent is also going to be highly desirable. Since we are running Boon of the Hoarder, we're going to be picking up more gold, and that's how we're going to use what we're going to use to empower rifts, right? So fitting in gold percent in other places is going to be useful. Try and get one reduces duration of control impairing effects on a piece if you can. That would be very nice to have as well. At least one would be nice. And then, yeah, it's just fitting in all of those gold find and pickup radius affixes. Going to be a challenge, right? But anyway, something really cool here is you can pretty much have a free option for the headpiece. You can run the Amethyst for extra life percent if you feel you need more toughness, or you can run the Emerald. Since we're doing Nephilim Rifting, and part of the build is picking up gold, having that extra gold find on the helmet as well is a very cool thing that we can do here. Since we don't need resource, we don't need cooldown, we just need attack speed, right? So, by the way, when you are gearing this out in season, attack speed is king. you want to meet those breakpoints first thing. So even if an item doesn't have crit or crit hit damage on it, just make sure you roll perfect attack speed on each item, and that'll get you going in season, right? Now I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this build. I will link the written guide, and all of the breakpoint information will be on there for you to look over, review at your own leisure. So thank you for watching, and have a good day.